Alright. Speed round recap. Smosh, a YouTube sketch comedy channel started by Payne here, ChaosNCabbages in 2002. The skits are very off the time, short comedy, the LOL, XD surrounding variety rather than the gore variety, with occasional darker or horny jokes scattered throughout. In 2011, the channel was bought by a media conglomerate called Defy Media for stock, and then private company, which would be worth money when it went public. In 2017, Anthony Padilla left to start an independent channel. Defy Media never went public, making the original sale effectively $0 when Defy went bankrupt in 2018. After Defy went bankrupt, Smosh was bought by Good Mythical Morning, another audio YouTube pair. Ian here comes with the company in June of 2023, and they together brought the company back. They posted their first get together Saturday 11th of July 2023. Cool. That's your backstory. Pause if you give a shit. On to the point of the video. I did watch Smosh as a teenager, but I lost interest before Anthony left the channel. However, I was really interested to see how the comedy would change without a corporation breathing down the necks of the writers, plus with a little more time and wisdom behind the comedy itself. So I watched this new skit, and it is a return to form. The skit itself is about summoning a demon through human sacrifice to get Taylor Swift tickets. It uses a lot of abrupt shifts in joke and theme for that shock of randomness and is superficially absurdist. If there is one thing I can say about this skit, it's that it has heart. It has a reason for existing, and that reason is that people had fun making it. And that is not worthy of either mockery or critique. Personally, I'm not planning to keep watching this channel or the skits that come from it, and my analysis will reflect that, but that doesn't mean this is objectively bad. If you enjoyed the old Smosh skits, you will enjoy this. As I mentioned, I lost interest in the old Smosh skits some time ago, but I have since put a lot of effort and analysis into getting better at writing comedy. So this video is going to be a case study into semi-absurdist comedic skit writing, with this new Smosh skit being the case which to study. Fair warning, analysis is the death of comedy. When you pick apart a joke, you tend to lose what actually made the joke funny in the first place. Not only that, the more you understand the anatomy of humor, the more what makes you laugh tends to change. There's a saying, if you want to make an audience laugh, dress a big burly man up like an old lady and push him down some stairs. If you want to make a comedy writer laugh, push an old lady down some stairs. So this is going to be me, pushing Smosh down a flight of stairs. I don't think that metaphor works. More to the point, if you've seen the new skit, liked it, and don't really want to watch an analysis that involves active criticism of it, best move on. There's nothing wrong with liking this kind of humor. I'm not calling anyone a bad person for it. I do like some of the jokes that are in it, but I think it's flawed in an interesting way, and frankly, it's topical. On the other hand, if you're here to watch someone just Smosh without a douche, this also may not be the video for you. This is not a video about the objective quality of the comedy, it's a case study. If you're an aspiring writer or comic, hearing my thoughts may help. Finally, if you yourself are a member of Smosh, hi, love your work. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna be more analytical than I am empathetic. The warnings stand. If you do choose to go through with watching this, like, first up, respect, and second of all, there's nothing I'm going to cover in this that I don't believe you guys are either capable of fixing or couldn't be argued as an important part of the personality and charm of your comedy. But also, I'm going to be saying things in this that if someone said about me would absolutely throw me for a loop. And I do think I would get out of that loop being better at comedy, but like, I'm telling you now, make sure you're in the very specific headspace that is good for weathering this blunter gamut of advice, because there's a lot of ones that are just not the right spot for it, as I'm sure you're aware. So, warnings done, I think we should begin with the individual jokes. So, first things first, you are welcome to watch the skit. It's linked in the description, but I also want to explain and analyze the individual jokes because the individual jokes are Smosh's strength. A brief list of those jokes are as follows. 1. Ian thinks it's Christmas. 2. The boys want Taylor Swift tickets. 3. Liam Payne still has tickets available. Taylor Swift doesn't. Walmartcom. 8. Most people are expensive because no one has them. 12. Having to die for Taylor Swift tickets. 15. Siri. 16. Shibari Pentagram. 18. Smosh the movie. And 19. Tickets up the arse. That is 19 jokes I am now going to run through and evaluate individually. We'll get to how they function as smaller parts of the skit later down the road. I will be including writing advice in that evaluation. Only some of that advice is about flaws in the script. Sometimes Smosh has done something well and I'm just elaborating on it. I'm not gonna be putting a great amount of effort into distinguishing those two because this is a video on writing advice, not... Joke number 1. Ian thinks it's Christmas. The skit opens with Anthony waking up a sleeping Ian saying, "Guess what day it is?" Ian guesses Christmas, Anthony says no, Ian looks disappointed. The whole question gives wrong answer, no, sad reaction joke format is not exactly new ground in comedy, but it's a good joke. Not so all pervasive as to be annoying, and I'd put it closer to knock-knock jokes, as more a common joke structure than an overused joke itself. It has a lot of potential to be spun into a callback where the character keeps answering questions like they, in this case, think it's Christmas. I like it as a starting joke. Number 2, the boys want Taylor Swift tickets. The day it actually is Taylor Swift ticket day, which the guys are very excited about. Now, there is an audience that would find the image of two men wanting to see Taylor Swift funny, though that audience is, insufferable? I'm including this in the list of jokes for 2 reasons. 1, because I feel like Defy Era Smosh would have made that joke, whereas currently it feels like a mix of liking the artist and referencing the whole Ticketmaster situation. And 2, because as a writer, it's important to be aware of the implications of words. This joke, in isolation from the rest of the skit, attracts 2 very different groups. The ones who find it relatable, men who like Taylor Swift, and the ones who find it mockable, men who still say no homo. If you are writing something, you can try to attract both groups, but your audience will be all the more annoying and intolerable for it, and when you eventually pick a side, by accident or on purpose, it will blow up in your face. Aim to use jokes around it to piss off whichever group you don't like. Joke number 3. Liam Payne has tickets, Taylor Swift doesn't. The Taylor Swift tickets are sold out, and on the laptop screen which says so, there is a line. But there's still plenty of Liam Payne tickets available. Please buy them. We need to sell 100 tickets or I lose my job. Click here. I like this joke. It made me chuckle. If I knew who Liam Payne was, it'd probably make me chuckle more. It's not a side splitter of a joke, but it doesn't need to be, because it's fast and not the focus of the moment. It takes up exactly as much space as needed. Having a lot of smaller background stuff like this rewards attentive viewing and rewatches. Joke number 4, the mental jump from Taylor Swift tickets to the dark arts. The boys need them ticks. They are lousy with desire. Something about tapeworms, to make a third joke about parasites. They decide to get the Taylor Swift tickets by summoning a demon from the depths of hell. If that felt abrupt, it's because I'm trying to mimic the speed with which it happens in the skit, which is good. Or, more specifically, the issue I have with this joke is not its speed. The speed aids in the comedic juxtaposition, which Merriam-Webster defines as chicken drumsticks, 2 kilograms, onions, 2 kilograms, 2 cans of chickpeas, 420 grams apiece, 2 packs of fettuccine, 500 grams apiece, plain white flour, 2 kilogram, wholemeal flour, 1 kilogram, can of tomato puree, 410 grams, pepperoni, 200 grams, popping corn kernels, 400 grams, hot peronaise sauce, 265 grams, Colby cheese block, 1 kilogram. Total for 13 items, $49.45. You put 2 things that seem unrelated next to each other for comedic effect. It's making the audience ask, how are those 2 things connected? And I love comedic juxtaposition because when done well, it is the peak of absurdism. I wish I could say the same about this beat. This was the moment in the skit when I first saw it that made me go, yeah, okay, not for me then, unsubscribe and click off. The broader reason is an implication I'll get to later when talking about how cohesive the skit itself feels, but I am starting with the joke. So, comedic juxtaposition. For me, for the joke to be effective, there needs to be some connection, some commentary, some puzzle to work out, which, when you do, adds a little extra joy to the joke. For example, I could say, you know, it's actually more cost-effective to drown someone in a hospital than in an office works, which seems like a non sequitur unless you're aware that printer ink is more expensive than human blood. And that Officeworks is an Australian supply store. There's a reward at the end there, if you know the fact, or look into it, or if the fact itself is implied by the broader work. But it's not very funny if you don't know that fact. You can make a joke out of there being no connection whatsoever, but that joke has to be based on breaking the norm of there being a connection. You have to be coloring outside the lines. If you never have a link, the lines start moving, so you've always been coloring inside them, and the exception, the shock value, comes in there being any link at all. That's the flaw of shock comedy. You can only shock someone so many times before they get used to it, and you have to change it up. And sure, some people start to like it, and I'm not one to kink shame, but by most people's standards, a dungeon that only has zappers is not very well stocked. If there's never a reward for trying to understand, and the novelty and shock value of there being no reason at all have worn off, all that's left is the joke by itself, which, because it is a non sequitur, isn't saying anything. Joke number 5, Walmartcom. The Book of Demon Summoning is from Walmartcom. This is communicated via a quick exchange between the two characters. It's a pop culture reference / a quick jab, and it's fine, but it also takes 5 to 10 seconds of the skit by itself, while the joke could have been communicated with a Walmart.com sticker on the book. Remember how I said earlier the Liam Payne joke took up exactly as much space as was needed? This one feels like it should be taking up the same amount of space, i.e. on screen for 2 seconds as part of a shot that is serving a separate purpose. Sometimes the joke is fine, it just can't pull as much weight as you've given it. Joke number 6. The book has a connected QR code. The book opens and reveals a QR code leading to the demon summoning app. I like this one. It sits in a relatable comedy point for me. I mean, how often do things have entirely unnecessary apps associated with them? But it doesn't overstay its welcome. It is indicative of a larger structural problem that I have already hinted at, but manages to avoid a lot of pitfalls that other jokes don't. It also does some really good things for the structure that I will talk about later. Joke number 7. Found a homeless guy. Oops, you need a sacrifice. Camera work hides the fact that Anthony moves, making it a surprise that he suddenly just has a homeless guy. Once again, it's abrupt, it's similar to the aforementioned comedic juxtaposition. But I like this one more. It has a much stronger link because it's done to directly answer a question Ian asks and serves the purpose of trimming fat. There are worse written skits that would have put a montage there with no joke beyond costumes and confused looks. This way you get more time for jokes and the reveal itself becomes a joke. Not only that, the camera work heightens the joke. The shot starts on both guys and pulls into Ian's face, and in your head, Anthony of course hasn't moved. But when it cuts to Anthony in a totally different spot, you realize he'd been out of shot and your brain goes, sure, that makes sense. It smooths the weirdness enough to give you a laugh, but not throw you out of the skit. Joke number 8. Society is a tragedy. To explain the choice of a homeless guy, Anthony says, I heard homeless people are expendable because no one loves them. I may have just been watching too much Dropout.tv, but you can phrase a similar sentiment with more nuance to the broader situation in half the amount of syllables and still hit the notes of dark comedy that are being aimed for. For example, from "I heard homeless people are expendable because no one loves them" to "'cause, like, who's gonna look for him? The cops?" That's 17 syllables down to 8, and this helps on 2 fronts. Firstly, that earlier point on joke number 2, men liking Taylor Swift, applies here. What you choose to show will say certain things to certain people. Currently, this can say anything from "I, the writer, consider this a tragedy" to "Yo, kids, bully the unhoused! Radical!" And you know, the last thing we want is people to have empathy for homeless people. Changing the phrasing to sharpen the implications makes for more effective communication. Sarcasm tends to muddy the situation, a lesson I apparently refuse to learn. Phrasing leads us to the second point. In general, more words rarely make jokes better. Really effective comedy is not about saying something, it's about leading the horse along until there's only one place left for their mind to go. It's about leading the horse to water and making sure it's thirsty enough to... That's right. Regret the person it wakes up next to tomorrow morning. Unless you're making part of the joke that you are breaking the convention, the better joke is the one that is shorter and forces the audience to fill in the gaps with their own understanding. You see it a lot in stand-up. The crowd starts laughing before the punchline hits because they've worked it out. Careful not to cut too much though, or the audience may not understand there's a joke at all.
Hello, Editing Bill here. I just realized that this next section probably could have been phrased better, so I'd just like to preface it by saying that it's less about the quality of the comedy and the jokes, and more just making it clear that the implication of what you say is different than what you intend to say in anything that you'll really ever make. And part of the art of writing is trying to make them as similar as possible. I'll be running through first what one line implied and made me go, and then how the following line really helped cement and contextualize the first line in a way that made me personally like it more. Keep in mind, me personally liking it more is the person who is liking it more is being pedantic enough to make this video, so take that much with a grain of salt, but overall, keep watching. I should have scripted this.
Number 9 and number 10. That's offensive/problematic and shut the fuck up sacrifice. Ian says Anthony's comment is offensive and problematic because they're called unhoused people. The sacrifice tries to talk. Ian tells him to shut the fuck up. These are 2 separate jokes, but they're intertwined enough that they kind of have to be talked about together. And once again, I may have been watching a bit too much Dropout.tv, but the words offensive and problematic need to be put in a bin and set on fire until people learn how to use them. They are up there with cringe as words used in place of an actual justification, though interestingly, often the thing being called offensive is something that actually shouldn't be said, but for reasons the person who's telling you not to say it is sometimes unaware or uncaring of. Like, how many of the people who tell you to call sex workers rather than prostitutes are aware that it's because prostitution is the name of the crime? It's the word associated with cops breaking down your door because you took some money for sometimes not even actually sleeping with someone, depending on the type of work. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who talk about that are more, "What? Now I can't say this slur? PC culture has gone mad!" rather than, "Well now, I'm a little worried you're more concerned with referring to the unhoused correctly than you are with feeding and housing them. Now, I'm not saying they're both not admirable goals, but one's a little bit less self-serving than the others, you know?" Yeehaw. You know, if I have to apologize for anything in this video, it's probably more likely to be the accents than if I've gotten something wrong about the sex worker situation. Feel free to yell at me about either in the comments. That all went through my head when I heard the first line, and it ties into the reason that I really like the shut the fuck up sacrifice line. It moves the joke from both using words that have been mostly stripped of meaning and mocking the people who still try to use them in good faith, to painting a caricature of the people who use those words purely for the social power they carry. It's what I have already been talking about, adding additional lines and jokes to help structure the ambiguity in a way that helps with the implications behind them, and it's why I had to talk about these two jokes together. But also, please burn those words. The joke still works if you replace the offensive/problematic line with, "Dude, you can't say that." Bonus points if Anthony says pigs instead of cops, so the audience thinks it's gonna be about that, but has expectations subverted. Joke number 11, an understanding sacrifice. After learning that this is all for Taylor Swift tickets, the sacrifice is very understanding about his impending murder. Okay, so you have two options for characters in absurdism. They either buy into the world, or they scream to an uncaring universe. It's like capitalism. It's normally good to have one character being normal in any absurd situation, to act as the straight man, a term which Merriam-Webster defines as brushed potatoes, 4 kilograms, broccoli, 1 head, can of tomatoes, 800 grams, can of chickpeas, 420 grams, 2 packs of fettuccine pasta, 500 grams each, dishwashing liquid, 400 mils, surface disinfectant, 500 mils, Australian cheddar, 1 kilogram. Total for 9 items, $30.76. Basically, in a lot of comedy, especially absurdism, it's good to have someone saying what the audience is thinking. If you suspend disbelief too much, some of the jokes just don't land. I will henceforth be referring to this role as the anchor, for reasons that I refuse to explain. British comedy uses anchors a lot. Mitchell and Webb are incredible at shifting the role between the two of them, occasionally mid-sketch. There's normally an everyman character in Monty Python. Argument Clinic or Self-Defense Against Fresh Fruit have great examples of both. Fry and Laurie shift it less than Mitchell and Webb. Fry seems to adore characters like the one he plays in Mr. Daliad. And even when Fry is occasionally the normal one in the room, Hugh Laurie tends to be more misinformed than actively odd. Like in Sex Talk in Class. All the skits I just mentioned should be very easy to find on YouTube by the names I mentioned them by. Anchors highlight and subsequently heighten absurd situation. Once again, you can make do without. Monty Python's Ministry of Silly Walks or How Not to Be Seen are great examples, but both of those skits are based around a single concept being heightened repeatedly, which is fundamentally different from this skit called We Summoned a Demon. I don't think I mentioned that. I can and will continue, but we're getting to structural stuff, so that will be later. I will leave it at having the sacrifice be scared or even just annoyed at the situation helps create conflict from which arises comedy. Joke number 12, a music cut when Ian starts talking. Anthony says they should take the sack off the sacrifice's faith and have some sympathy. Sad music starts to play, which cuts as soon as Ian starts talking, disregarding what Anthony was saying. Playing with background music can carry a joke all to its own. You have more to play with than just a script, and this joke shows that. Good joke. Good thing to do, good lesson to take. Joke number 13! Talking about the sacrifice like a puppy you're going to drown in a river. That universal experience. Ian talks about the sacrifice like a puppy being drowned in a river or a cow being slaughtered for meat. It's a comedic situation, a joke that doesn't need to have a punchline or have a punchline, but one that could be heightened with the presence of an anchor. Joke number 14, Latin chanting. There is almost certainly a joke in the Latin chanting that is done when they are actually summoning the demon. But I'm not translating it. I refuse, actually. It's a good place to hide a joke, and because some part of it is a reward for effort, it can be a pretty dumb joke. Number 15, the whole Siri bit. Siri, having linked in with the summoning app, mishears the Latin and asks if the boys want Taylor Swift tickets or to summon a demon. Ian says they don't want to summon a demon. Siri asks if he said semen. Ian corrects her to demon. That is taken as confirmation to summon a demon rather than tickets. This would have been funnier back when Siri sucked shit at understanding you, but it functions. I really like how it gets Ian to confirm the demon rather than the tickets, and it's cleverer than just having Siri summon the demon immediately. It's a good joke. Joke number 16. The ropes on homeless Steve become a pentagram. As the sacrifice is replaced by a demon, the ropes tying him become a bondage pentagram. And, you know, it's a nice touch. I'd like to imagine he's spending the afterlife in eternal shibari. I leave it to audience interpretation about whether that's a good thing. Number 17, Ian has a sudden torture plan. Ian decides to use the demon to track down a Taylor Swift fan and torture them for their tickets. It needs an anchor. Anthony does question it, but his isn't quite enough. This is absurd because it was Ian's first thought, and drawing attention to that helps with transition and pacing. Joke number 18, Smosh the movie. The torture Ian plans to use is a DVD copy of Smosh the movie. This one also made me chuckle. I like the small things, and this one is given the right amount of weight. Number 19, tickets are up the arse. The demon starts torturing the Taylor Swift fan it has brought in, even though the fan was going to say where the tickets were. There's an extended scream. Ian comes back, the fan dies, the tickets were up their arse, and this is a joke. I acknowledge that this is funny to some people. Structurally, it feels like it should have been a callback to an earlier point in the skit, but it just isn't. Like, this feels like it's the third beat where the first one was suggesting looking for something up someone's ass, the second was trying to look up someone's ass, and the third was the tickets actually being up someone's ass. And that's the whole skit. Each joke individually. There are some issues, to be sure, but literally everything ever made has had issues. Overall, most of the jokes are either solid or have potential. But the case study isn't done. Skit writing is about more than just jokes, it's about stringing all the jokes together. It's about how they interact. So, there is a reason most sketch comedy shows do not fill the whole 20-minute episode with one skit, and why most comedic shows are stories first and comedies second. Jokes don't always work in the same contexts. Bo Burnham songs are a pretty bad fit for an Adam Sandler movie, and if you put too many jokes in quick succession, it breaks the comedic immersion, a term which I entirely made up, but which is, to me, the biggest issue with this skit. Over the 19 odd jokes, there are 5 distinct concepts, ranging in size from a single joke to the concept of the video. They are: Ian thinks it's Christmas, the boys want Taylor Swift tickets, the boys summon a demon, the boys terrorize innocents, and the tickets are up the arse. Some of these jokes work quite well together. In the case of Taylor Swift tickets to terrorizing innocents, or terrorizing innocents to demon summoning. Others do not. Taylor Swift to demon summoning are pretty incongruous despite having a middleman, and the first and last jokes of the skit could be replaced with pretty much anything and still work fine. There are 2 solutions. The first one is to kill your darlings. If something doesn't work, sometimes the easiest and best answer is to just remove it from the script, even if you love the joke. Personally, I hate the advice of killing your darlings. Not because it isn't ever good advice, but because it creates really, really boring skits when over-applied. You know the sort of skits, the ones where the entire joke, commentary, and point is contained in the title of the skit. There are good versions of these sorts of sketches and skits, single concept comedy based on the continuous heightening of the premise. How Not to Be Seen or The Fish Slapping Dance, both by Monty Python, are great examples of single concept heightening. For The Fish Slapping Dance, the concept is just two guys hitting each other with fish, tale as old as time. The fishes get bigger over the course of the skit to the limits of practical effects at the time. How Not to Be Seen is just the concept of, here's a tutorial on how to hide. What if we blew up everyone who tried to hide in the tutorials? The explosions get bigger, the attempts to hide get better. These skits work by picking a concept that is very, very easy to understand and just taking it to an absurd extreme. You don't want a subplot in these sorts of skits. It creates too many moving parts and detracts from the overall comedy. But I don't think the Smosh skit has too many parts. You could make it about going to greater and greater extremes to get Taylor Swift tickets, but that would entirely change the structure. You'd turn it into something more like the stages of grief expressed in different ways to get Taylor Swift tickets, sort of like Title and Deal, which sounds like a good skit, but also sounds like a different skit. The script doesn't need trimming, it needs cohesion. More specifically, from using an anchor, extending setups, and using callback jokes. Having to re-immerse yourself each time the concept of the skit changes makes for uncomfortable viewing. Every time one joke ends and another begins, it's a chance for the audience to check out and leave. The more cohesive the jokes are, the less abrupt the transition, and the more engaging the skit becomes. If the audience was brought in the first place. That abrupt transition, and the abundance of them within the skit, is why I checked out on the fourth joke. The jump from Taylor Swift tickets to the dark arts wasn't a bad jump to make comedically, but it's the second abrupt change to happen in the skit. The first one being from Christmas to Taylor Swift. The first time I saw that, it told me this skit was gonna be a lot of 3 or 4 joke series without very much linking them. And when I finally watched it fully, I was right. The pacing of the skit is jerky. The closest comparison I can think of is to suspension of disbelief. When reading a story, there are certain things you have to accept as the internal logic of the universe. If the story establishes that logic and then breaks it without good cause, it throws you out of the story. It breaks the premise. Changing the joke mid-skit similarly breaks the premise. If that itself is the joke, good. There is absolutely a skit in 2 people trying to do 2 different skits at the same time. In fact, I'm almost certain there's a Mitchell and Webb skit about that. But there's a difference between clever disregard for convention and poor writing. Every time you break the premise, the audience has to get reinvested. And if they're laughing at that premise break, good. If it's just something that's happened, they're gonna leave. You might say that the point of absurdism is to break the rules, but absurdism breaks the rules of our reality, not the rules of comedy. A lot of absurdism comes from placing 2 entirely unrelated ideas next to each other. Self-defense, fresh fruit. Arguments, a calm clinic. A Superman figure called Captain Todger. What you need to do is mix these 2 ideas effectively. Make them feel like a single concept. This skit does do that occasionally with interactions with the sacrifice is probably one of the better examples, but when it does, it hits the second pitfall. Once the skit feels whole and the suspension of disbelief stops breaking, the absurd becomes the internal logic of that world. Jokes stop landing because the audience accepted them as normal for what they are participating in. And that is why we use the anchor. Anchors are kind of an audience stand-in because they say what the audience should be thinking, but isn't, if you've done your job right. Really effective absurdism pulls you into this world and concept, gets you to accept the absurd reality of it, and then gets you to laugh at yourself by pointing out how odd that world actually is. So, coming back to the skit, the whole thing is an exercise in heightening the absurdism of the situation. Taylor Swift tickets to the dark arts, to demon summoning via QR code, to finding a human sacrifice, to having no qualms about killing that human sacrifice, to Siri being involved in demon summoning, to torturing someone for concert tickets, to those tickets being hidden up that person's ass. It is absurd on 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 absurd. A tower growing higher and higher, shakier and shakier, but we never zoom out to remind ourselves just how shaky the foundations are. Almost every beat is immediately accepted by all characters, which tells the audience to do the same. This is a conceptually hilarious situation, but if we aren't reminded of that broader concept, it just becomes a weird story. When it has a single concept, like the fish slapping dance or how not to be seen, the audience can keep the real world in mind. But by adding in additional concepts, you're engaging the brain enough to pull the audience in. The Sacrifice and the Taylor Swift fan are probably the best candidates for anchor. You don't have to have them begging for their life or anything, just make them actively not want to be there, and from that conflict, comedy shall arise. It's important to note, the anchor does not have to be a single character for the entire skit. Different characters will react differently to different things, and it often gives a much more well-rounded feeling to the characters and to the broader work to have different characters anchor different scenarios. This is why Mitchell and Webb do so well with switching anchors. David Mitchell acts as a logical anchor, someone who's baffled by how situations sometimes just don't make sense. Robert Webb, on the other hand, acts as an empathetic anchor, someone who is baffled when people don't just do the social norm in a social situation. A stellar example of anchor comedy is Mitchell and Webb's Are We the Baddies, or Fry and Laurie's Mr. Daliad. Now, anchors can wear thin on the audience if they just recount the situation of the joke. The audience has seen the skit, they know what has happened. Having the anchor react like a normal person would in that situation is often enough to remind the audience into remembering just how fucked the situation is. The other way an anchor can get annoying is if the audience doesn't need to be reminded about the skit, because they keep being taken out of the world by the jerky pacing. If the anchor remarks on something being wrong and the audience is already aware of it, it comes off more as the author being aware of problems in their writing, but not being willing to fix it. So, let's work on making the skit cohesive with extended setups. Extending a setup is the process of separating your setup and your punchline and putting other jokes in between them. It's actually a remarkably subtle way of adding cohesion to a skit. Sorry? This skit has an excellent example of extending a setup. If you didn't have the QR code joke, the later joke about using Siri to summon a demon would feel off in the same way as jumping from Taylor Swift to the dark arts did earlier in the skit. If you had then used an anchor to question that situation, it would become infuriating. But if you use this smaller, more relatable joke of the QR code to sneak into a more absurd situation, you can then question it. It becomes this little magic trick where the audience can laugh at themselves for being tricked. Okay, I swear to fucking God, if this is the... The other thing it lets you do is put more punchlines in quick succession. For example, at the moment, I am stable monetarily, but one wrong step away from a bad situation. I'm earning about as much as I spend each week, and I'm not spending much. Now, part of that is my own choices. However, a fun fact about capitalist economic theory is that it's actually desirable under it for a certain amount of people to be in this situation, which says so many great things about a system governing so many of our lives, and I swear to fucking God. Okay. Also, if you're in my situation, don't give your doctor your personal phone number. They will not stop texting you about experimental medical procedures. See? Plant the seed with the buzzing phone, pay it off by putting the punchline right where it'll help accentuate another joke. Neither of those jokes were particularly strong individually, but they play better together. In the case of this skit, extending more of the setups or using smaller punchlines as setups would just help it all flow better. You know, put a Taylor Swift joke into the middle of the demon thing, and that might help the ideas mesh a little more. You can also do my favorite type of extended setup, the callback. Merriam-Webster defines a callback joke as cooking salt, 2 kilograms, free-range eggs, 700 grams, dishwashing tablets, 46 pack, cooking bacon, 1 kilogram, Australian cheddar, 1 kilogram, Nutella spread, 500 grams, fettuccine pasta, 2 packs, 500 grams each. Total for 8 items, $62.60. Callback jokes are similar to references, and incidentally, that little receipt joke is both a callback to earlier in the episode and a reference to a channel called PhilosophyTube. Essentially, a callback joke is a reference to something from earlier within the same work. It does share a lot of similarities with an extended setup and is kind of a subset of, but whereas an extended setup separates your setup and your punchline, a callback joke lets you use the same punchline multiple times for the same joke. It's an excellent way to sprinkle in smaller jokes and make them feel more cohesive within the skit, because a joke that took a paragraph to set up earlier can be paid off later with half a sentence, a single word, or even just a background image. There are 2 jokes in the Smosh skit that would really benefit from being involved in callbacks. The first one and the final one. The first joke is, as I said, a starting joke that I like. I would like it more if, over the course of the skit, Ian still clearly wanted it to be Christmas. When they decide to summon a demon, the boys talk in unison, so have Ian start saying "Write to Santa" instead of "the dark arts," and then be kind of embarrassed about it. When he proposes torture as an option for the Taylor Swift fan, have someone question why that was his first thought, to which he says, "Well, my first thought was about writing to Santa, but that keeps getting shot down." When he goes to get the Smosh movie for torture-related reasons, have the room just be exceedingly Christmassy. And that would honestly be reaching a critical mass of callbacks to Christmas within the one skit. Callbacks are good. As I said, they're one of my favorite bits of comedy in general, but they have diminishing returns. A good rule of thumb is that comedy comes in 3s, though, as with all rules, take it as a loose framework. I think of it like this. 1 is a joke, 2 is a callback, 3 is a pattern, and by 4 we fucking get it. If the joke isn't changing, or it isn't an absolutely perfect moment for that callback, it's probably not worth putting in. But if you're very clever, you will have noticed we're at 4 Christmas jokes. start of the skit, right to scanter, torture idea, room decorations. Why? Remember, take the rule as a loose framework. It goes all the way back to weight. The smaller and simpler the joke, the less weight it needs to be given. The less weight is placed on the joke, the more forgivable it is that the joke is wearing out its welcome. A fourth line about Christmas? Too much, wearing out the actual point and humor of the situation. A little bit of background detail? Perfect. Then we have the final joke, which can showcase the inversion of the callback. Whereas with the Christmas joke, it starts with a big focused joke and progressive callbacks are smaller, with the anal one, you can start with smaller jokes and work your way up. In fact, it is normally recommended that you do so. The issue with the ass joke is that it kinda comes from nowhere and yet is also the obvious joke. Like, when Anthony starts getting a thoughtful look while the guy who I think was in Unisonus? More like, goodness, anus, am I right? I never watched Unisonus. He seems chill, anyway, while he's screaming in agony, the word ass becomes the obvious punchline, but, like, nothing else about the skit has been particularly ass-centric, so it's not really a satisfying note to end on. So, add things about an ass, specifically stirring things in one. Ramp it up over the course of about 3 jokes. First up, have the sacrifice mention keeping something safe up his ass. Then, with the Taylor Swift fan, suggest looking up his ass. Have your anchor say, no, that's ridiculous. Finally, find something up the fan's ass. And just like that, you'll have more jokes in much the same span of time, and the closing, final joke of the video isn't just the concept of keystering. But we can go further. Part of the issue with callback jokes is that it's the same joke again and again. That's why you've usually only got 3 or 4 goes of it. Usually. With these 2 jokes, what you have the potential to do is fantastic. If, by gradual evolution, you change the joke each time, you can have that one joke made multiple times throughout the same video. It would be a joke that starts as Christmas and ends with things up the arse. Just like Christmas. The way you do that is by putting parts of each joke inside of each other. This is getting too much. That one was not on purpose. Though I did choose to keep it in the script. Okay, jokes inside of each other. Have the thing, the sacrifice is keeping safe up his ass, be a Christmas gift. Suggest looking up the fan's ass in the same breath as the first thought being torture. When you decorate the torture room, put tinsel on a butt plug. This is the most important comedic decision you will ever make, and if you don't, you will find ruination. At its best, there is a seamless line from one joke to another. In this case, it almost certainly wouldn't be seamless, but it would be interesting. And, more importantly, it would create an overall through line to the skit. You're taking 2 jokes and extending them out to shore up the greater structure. Ideas like that help with general cohesion, help with the audience staying invested. And with that, I think I can move on to a conclusion. There is more to talk about here. The language of editing would take a video all to its own, and while the acting is not my cup of tea, I prefer the generally understated British skit acting, I would not be able to talk about the acting here both in good faith and while providing any sort of actual useful feedback. It'd be like me giving technique tips on violin just because I've played a cello sonata on saxophone. So, just looking at the writing, what can we say? On an individual level, the jokes work. They function. Yes, there are some areas to improve, but none of these jokes are a what's the deal with airplane food situation.
Some of them I really like, some just need to be given a little bit less weight, and some need to be elaborated and expanded on. The real issue here is the broader structure and anatomy of a skit. The jokes function, but they don't have enough in common with each other to quite click. The that's so randomness of it is an initial defense until you realize that style of comedy is a pale shadow of absurdism, stripping away the conventions more out of laziness than vision. That is not a kind way of phrasing that. I just have a vendetta against works with a lot of potential which refuse to fulfill it. That being said, there are moments which really work. While the pacing overall is jerky, Ian and Anthony have shown the ability to write in a way that smooths that out. So, if you are a writer, how should you go about making sure everything is as smooth as can be? The answer lies in the second draft, and third draft, and fourth draft, and fifth draft, and as many drafts as you can stomach. Write the skit first, as it appears to you. That is your first draft. One of the many things to look for when you read over it are jokes that feel abrupt. Getting someone else to read it over is a great way to find them. These are the jokes that need to be blended in using both techniques that I've discussed in this video and additional other techniques. Place information earlier in the skit to make the transition more gradual. Pepper in callbacks. Make it so it seems more like a weird dream than a skit. Then, right when the audience starts to fade away, sink the fucker with an anchor. Pull them back down to reality and get the laugh out of them like that. Will that make it a perfect skit? No. Will it work for every skit? Also no. It's better for plot-based absurdism than, say, political or relatable comedy. Is it the only thing you should use for plot-based absurdism? Also no. But it is a pretty generally applicable process that is a good idea to have in your toolbox for when and where it is appropriate. And that is all I think I have to say. As I said, money's a little tight right now, so if anybody is looking for a script editor, shoot me an email. Otherwise, fuck off.
Just salt a peach cobbler, chuck it in the oven, get it out, cut themselves a fucking slice, slap it on a plate, put a couple of ice cream on it, gob glob, eat it up and make them, oh, it's so fucking good, wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey, smosh without a douche. Glitter in my fucking pants, had a premonition that I fell into a rhythm with this glitter in my fucking pants. Ah! Okay.